The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King was the acclaimed final entry in perhaps the best movie trilogy and the best cinematic adaptation of all time. For its astounding achievement, it was nominated for a whopping 11 Oscars, winning each of them. This makes it, along with Ben-Hur and Titanic, the most awarded film in Oscars history. So, when a movie gets nominated for 13 awards, well, you know you're about to witness one of cinema's all-time events. Something truly profound, groundbreaking, an Olympic contribution to art, to humanity itself.
Men to woman, or woman to men.
Man to woman.
From penis to vagina.
What is that?
Adam's apple reduction.
Yes, 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 yes.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is Emilia Perez. What's not to love about the story of a transgender Mexican cartel boss who wants a sex change to escape from a life of crime? A tale that tackles the sordid tragedy of Mexico's drug wars and the social strife, the human tragedy that they've created. A story that is at the same time a tale of love and jealousy and father and or motherhood. Truly, this was a movie made for the award shows. But alas, we live in a world of haters and bigots, and the movie's been turned into the bloody front line of a culture war battle between the brilliant, the far-sighted, the just and decent and tolerant folks of the Oscars nominating committee and, literally everybody else. For one thing, Emilia Perez is positively loathed in Mexico itself, and since the story around Emilia Perez is almost as wacky as the movie, it's worth spending a little bit of time on the story behind the story. Top of the list of Mexico's complaints is that a movie set in Mexico about Mexicans featured a grand total of no Mexicans in its cast. Or one, no, there might have been one Mexican in there somewhere. Mexican critics accused the movie's French director, Jacques Audiard, of never even visiting the country. Sacre bleu, Monsieur Audiard replied. He said he went on location scouting there like 3 times, and then he decided that real Mexico, well, it just wasn't as good as the Mexico he'd invented in his head, so he decided to make the rest of the movie in Paris. And the reason there are no Mexicans in the movie about Mexicans is that Mexico has, and I quote, a lack of local talents. Yeah, your whole country has a skill issue, Mexicans. How does that make you feel? That's why the director hired a bunch of people who speak pretty much every other type of Spanish except Mexican Spanish, and didn't even bother to check how you spell basic words like prison where you're from. Silly Monsieur Audiard, this is wrong. It's spelled Mexico. Asked why he ever thought writing a movie in a language he barely speaks, set in a country he doesn't like, featuring people he doesn't rate, was a good idea, Monsieur Audiard said, Spanish is a language of modest countries, of developing countries, of the poor and migrants. God, if the Spanish still had inquisitions, they could do some very interesting things with all these quotes. But yeah, there you are, Mexicans, and Spanish speakers generally. The Frenchman thinks you're all talentless pores. These explanations have not comforted the Mexicans. The movie chain Cinépolis, biggest in the country, is now the subject of a government intervention. It has for some time operated a satisfaction guarantee policy, slapping a Cinépolis guarantee label on movies it's just so damn sure you'll love that you'll get a refund if you walk out in the first 30 minutes. But so many people walked out of Emilia Perez that Cinépolis allegedly changed the meaning of its Cinépolis guarantee. When we said guarantee, we didn't really guarantee anything. We were just promoting the movie. It's more of a guideline, you know? But then, so many people were so unhappy with this response that Profico, the Mexican government's own consumer protection agency, has had to set up a hotline for people to complain that they watched Emilia Perez and now can't get their money back. So the Mexican government is investigating Mexico's largest cinema chain because so many Mexicans were insulted about a movie about Mexico made by a Frenchman that has no Mexicans in it because he thought they had a skill issue and he couldn't find a single talented Mexican anywhere in the country. Some bold and creative citizens of this benighted nation have taken matters into their own hands. A Mexican trans woman called Camila Aurora created a musical about France set entirely in Mexico and with an entirely Mexican cast. Joanne Sacre Bleu tells the story of a trans woman heiress of the biggest baguette maker in France who becomes embroiled in a love affair with Agtugo Ratatouille, the equally trans but in the other direction Dauphine of France's biggest croissant company.
tu hijo lanza un cohete a la familia, sacrilegio, casi cortándole el cuello, es gatástico.
Pero entonces yo ando tomando la delantera, tomando 400 gatas y así ganando la carrera.
I am entirely in favor of this sort of response. I think we should have even more musical-based international warfare.
Te sentirás tan cómoda.
¡Tontas! ¡Bienvenida!
That's it, Chris. It's war. War has broken out. This is a war.
That's it. Yes, it's war.
Relations between Mexico and France have not been so strained since the Franco-Mexican Pastry War of 1838. French President Emmanuel Macron called a joint press conference during which he planned to preemptively surrender to his counterpart, but nobody from the Mexican government showed up because it was nap time. And yeah, incredibly, only that last bit was a bit. There are many other complaints about Emilia Perez.
This is why, like, in the Wikipedia section, you know, Wikipedia, and it's bid to be balanced, always has to do that thing where it lists criticisms, but then it says, you know, well, and not all criticism is, like, negative toward the movie. The Wikipedia paragraph, the balancing paragraph, says, contrasting to the negative general reception, the reception found within Mexico's cultural sector was not so markedly at odds with the film. Mexican cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto found the experience he encountered watching the film to be offensive and completely inauthentic. That's the balancing out criticism. That's the one they use to prove to you that not all of Mexico hates the movie. And that's kind of why, right? Because like your first introduction and really the only thing you ever see of Mexico all the way through this movie is just dilapidation, poverty, random stabbings, and people buying junk. And that's kind of it. It's lovely.
But thus far, we've only really talked about the geopolitical fallout from a movie very few people bothered to watch. What about some of the cast controversies? This next bit of the video is almost certainly a hate crime, but, you know, I'm just relaying the facts. The movie's lead, Juan Carlos Sofia Gascon, born Juan Carlos Gascon Ruiz, snagged the Best Actress nomination at the Oscars. To the long list of things at which men are better than women, we can officially add being women. And yet it appears the Academy didn't think it worth checking whether their Best Actress nominee met basic tests of sanity and public decency. Things got off to a predictably bad start when Gascon chose to compare her movie to the Holocaust and its critics to the Nazis, writing on Twitter, "Today, someone asked me if I thought there was an orchestrated campaign against my nomination and against Emilia Perez. It is more than obvious that we have a serious problem that threatened humanity once again. As Popper warned, I think she means Karl Popper, tolerating the intolerant ends tolerance. Be careful not to continue to ignore hate speech. That's how it started in Germany and how we ended up in concentration camps. Be careful not to laugh at the jokes of leaders who want to cut back on our rights. Be careful because those who laugh the most today will be the most harmed tomorrow. Cause, effect." Yes, indeed, as history will attest, the Nazi Party was founded on film criticism, free speech, and laughter. The thing is, Gascon is not a novice when it comes to questionable invocations of the Führer, and generally staking positions not usually heard from Oscars contenders. And she made the mistake of seeming to attack fellow Oscars contender, Brazilian and full-time woman Fernanda Torres, whose social media team she accused of undermining Emilia Perez. Perish the thought. This perceived slight naturally didn't sit well with many Brazilians, thus involving a third continent in the brewing world war, and they went to work trawling through Gascon's old tweets. It took them about 5 minutes to unearth a veritable treasure trove of disobliging remarks toward, among others, African Americans, Koreans, and Muslims. She has a lot to say about Muslims. It's well, we'll get there. But we begin inevitably with Gascon on Hitler again. This is the same old story. Black slaves and women in the kitchen. But it is my opinion, and it must be respected. I do not understand so much world war against Hitler. He simply had his opinion of the Jews. Well, that's how the world goes. Unlike what's been reported, this isn't actually her defending Hitler and his opinions about Jews. Context is quite hard to come by these days, but it seems likely that she was here once again, comparing trans people to Jews and so-called transphobia to anti-Semitic bigotry. What she was doing in this tweet was not defending Hitler's attitude toward the Jews, but parodying someone whose attitude leads to Hitler. First, they came for the Jews, you see, and then, somewhere on page 767, they came for the trans actresses and their musicals. I think they were just below Polish librarians on the kill list. Now, it's not a great look, nor is it a particularly defensible position, but it is wrong for other reasons than those reported. The same cannot be said, though, of Gascon on the Muslims, which puts the phobia in the sentence. Is it really, though? New attack in France? Beheadings in Nice by one of these followers of Allah? How many times will we have to expel these madmen from Europe until we realize that their religion is incompatible with Western values? We do not learn. Thank you, Erdogan. Thumbs up. Islam is becoming a hotbed of infection for humanity that urgently needs to be cured. How many more times will history have to expel the Moors from Spain? We have not yet realized what this threat of civilizations means, which constantly attacks the freedom and coherence of the individual. It's not about racism, it's about Islam. Islam is wonderful, without any kind of sexism. Women are respected, and when they are respected a lot, they leave a little square on their face so that their eyes and mouth can be seen, but only if they behave well. Although they dress like that for pleasure, what a deep, disgusting humanity. Yeah, I mean, I could go on, because there's more, and so I will. Let me get this straight. If you say that the fucking Moors are back killing them, that's racism. But if a Libyan terrorist starts stabbing white people in a park in England, that's justice for oppression. The great backwardness in rights is Islam. Imagine what these Arabs would say if every time they came to Europe, we commanded permission from their wives, or forced them to wear socks with flip-flops and a mask covering their faces. Or better yet, sentenced them to death for greeting other men with kisses on the mouth. We have many people confused. The more they talk about education at home, the less educated the parents are. It goes hand in hand. Schools must guarantee the free development of thought, precisely to avoid the lack of freedom of development at home. Check out Arabs. I mean, this is quite plainly an attack on homeschoolers, but you know. As the Al-Qaeda man said after the first plane hit on 9/11, which had nothing to do with Islam, but wait, there's more. Until we ban religions that go against European values and violate human rights, such as Islam, under the protection of freedom of worship, we will not end part of the huge problem we face. Faith manipulates those who cling to faith. It seems that the perpetrator of the rape is a Moroccan immigrant who robbed her in passing. If in Spain there is still an aberrant machismo in certain sectors of the population, imagine what comes to us from countries where women are worth nothing. So Europe is out of control. By now, it should be clear that Gascon's crime in this instance is having opinions shared by rather too many people, and that's not how the Oscars works. Awards don't exist to honor popular things. What would be the point in that? As for Islam, well, it must be acknowledged it too has a bit of a PR problem, and the marriage between it and the kind of Western progressive ideals the Oscars typically champions is strained, for reasons obvious to anyone who is not a Western progressive. For one thing, the Western progressive conception of female empowerment isn't quite the same as the Islamic one, though it does make you think the Mohammedans might be onto something. So, when the Muslim Public Affairs Council responded to Gascon's comments, it really did try to adopt the language of useful allies. Delete it or not, these tweets are hurtful, offensive, and shocking. Most especially coming from someone who is a member of another vulnerable community. Muslims are part of every community, including the transgender community. European values? Does she mean the ones that led to the Holocaust? She needs to immerse herself in Islamic history. When Europe was in the Dark Age, Muslims were busy discovering math, science, and medical equipment. Learn, woman. Oh, you were doing so well. Hurtful, offensive, shocking, vulnerable community. That's all really good. Well done. And you didn't misgender her even. That's really good of you. Not as big a concession as you might think, given Iran pioneered so much in the field of gender reassignment, on the principle that it is better to have a living daughter than a dead gay son. But unfortunately, having granted Gascon the rank of woman, they thereby qualified her for a little bit of good old Islamic misogyny. Learn, woman. That's not a great way to end it. Anyway, not content with offending the religion of explosive explosive piece, Gascon set her sights on another of the world's most expensively violent faith movements. I really think that very few people ever cared about George Floyd, a drug addict swindler, but his death has served to once again demonstrate that there are people who still consider black people to be monkeys without rights and consider policemen to be assassins. They are all wrong. Oh, and then to top it off with no sense of irony whatsoever, there's Gascon on the 2021 Oscars. More and more, the Oscars are looking like a ceremony for independent and protest films. I didn't know if I was watching an Afro-Korean festival, a Black Lives Matter demonstration, or the 8M. Apart from that, an ugly, ugly gala. I believe the 8M is some kind of Spanish feminist movement. It's not worth looking into. Naturally, these unearthed tweets have rather derailed the Emilia Perez Oscars campaign. Responding to the controversy in a statement via Netflix, Gascon said, "As someone in a marginalized community, I know this suffering all too well, and I am deeply sorry to those I have caused pain. All my life, I have fought for a better world. I believe light will always triumph over darkness." And then, ironically, she decided that darkness was probably the best response. And then she came out and complained that she'd been taken completely out of context and been given no chance to defend herself. I'm just gonna throw it out there, defending yourself is easier if you don't delete your social media accounts. I cannot fix my past actions. I can only say that today I am not the same person from 10 or 20 years ago. And although I have not committed any crime, I am not perfect either, nor am I now. I only try to learn to be a better person every day. But yeah, it's fine. You know, she's a woman now. She doesn't have to be good at maths. Gascon continued, explaining that some of her best friends are Muslim. Or, one of her best friends is Muslim. They have already won. They have achieved their objective to stain my existence with lies or things taken out of context, she wrote. Anyone who knows me knows that I am not a racist. You will be surprised when you find out that one of the most important people in my current life and that I love the most is Muslim. Nor any of the things for which I have been judged and condemned without trial and without option to explain true intention. I have always fought for a more just society and for a world of freedom, peace, and love. I will never support wars, religious extremism, or the oppression of races and peoples. Who's doing the religious extremism, Carla? Actually, no, fuck it, don't answer that question, Carla. And she concluded, "My mother told me something beautiful yesterday. I don't care if you win anything. I just want you to be well and not hurt. Mum, life has put me here to send a message of hope and love into this world, and I will fulfill it." Now, to be clear, I make no comment on the rightness, wrongness, or baseness of Gascon's musings. I simply repeat them because it's very, very funny that in a transparent bid to burnish their progressive bona fides, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences nominated for Best Actress somebody with so many bloke-in-the-pub opinions. Most Oscars contenders restrict themselves to attacking various shades of whiteness and manhood, but scarcely does Gascon see a minority without finding something to complain about. It's as if she's on a one-woman, man-person mission to redress years of imbalance in the racism. And it puts the Oscars in an unenviable bind. Because if Gascon's tweets tank the movie's prospect of winning awards, then the Oscars will confirm what most sensible people concluded many years ago. They are not rewarding artistic merit, they are rewarding political alignment. Gascon should have done the safe thing of blaming all the ills of the world on whiteness and maybe calling for the odd murder of a Republican or a health insurance executive. You know, acceptable hatred. Fuck it, just stick to calling Mexicans talentless and Spanish-speaking people poor. It's what Audreyard did, and he's up for Best Director still. If Emilia Perez deserves awards for artistic achievement, then historical comments by one of its lead actors should make no difference. If they make all the difference, then it was never a question of artistic merit, and the Academy has been hoisted by its own retard. Yet, if the Academy ignores the comments, then pretty much every single person involved with it, the sponsors, the actors, the journalists, all of its curated audience, well, they'll all hate it, because these award shows have long run on the same basis as a political rally and have attracted the same constituents. So, which way, Academy man? Do you want artistic or social credibility? Because you can't have both. Not anymore. It's unfortunate for Gascon that she has done so much to transcend boxes because it denies her natural allies. Were she not trans, had she not first suggested that trans people are the new Jews and critics of her movie are a recrudescence of Reich thought, then she might have found a constituency primed to take her side. After all, what's happening here, what I've just described, is a traditional cancel culture campaign against somebody who deviates from progressive orthodoxy. But the online right isn't going to turn out in support of the trans actress lead of a trans-based musical that only rose to prominence for its appeal to progressive political mantras. Because looking for intellectual consistency to activists of any political stripe, well, that's a bit like looking for Jews in Yemen. It should be staggering that this film was ever considered for awards, but it is damning that this movie might lose awards for all the reasons listed above. But fuck it, hey, as the chap once said, the revolution, it devours its children. Anyway, we have to bring this section to a close because the longer it takes, the more victims will be added to Gascon's reign of error. What of the message of hope and love she promised her mother she would spread to the world whenever she's not insulting most of the world's inhabitants? What of Emilia Perez itself? Well, this video is not just an exploration of the tour de farce that exists around Emilia Perez, it is also an exploration of the tour de farce that is Emilia Perez, a movie that had upset whole continents even before all these old tweets resurfaced. To truly understand why so many have been pissed off by so few, including the alphabet people, they also hate the movie, well, we must talk about the movie.
Such cultural music. Very cultural, yes.
Emilia Perez is really 3 movies placed in a line that nobody could be bothered to stitch together. It has 2 protagonists, Zoe Saldana's character, Zoe Saldana, a poor lawyer who wants more money, and the evil cartel boss, Juan Del Monte. Fucking, yep, they named the Mexican character Del Monte, who realizes that mass murder doesn't give him the happiness he deserves anymore, so he transitions into Emilia Perez.
Oh, wow, this is great. Look at that, I'm peeing sitting down like a dainty, dignified little woman. Say, any of you ladies want to go see a sad movie together?
The very first musical number is our first "what did the movie mean by this" moment, as children sing about buying refrigerators and people get randomly stabbed in the street.
De violencia, de amor, de muerte.
And this is the film at its most complimentary. Zoe Saldana works as a defense lawyer getting guilty men off scot-free because corruption, etc. But all the credit gets taken by her useless male colleague. This will be something of a running theme. Manhood is something to be transcended, and if it cannot be transcended, it is something to be overcome. She begins to complain about the lack of money in song in order that she can immediately get a creepy phone call in the bathroom from a man who offers her lots of money. There's just not much money in corruption, you see, even though later in the movie, she raises lots of money from the same people she's here helping to acquit. So she has to go and be corrupt to make money that she thinks she's... Fuck it. It's not consistent, alright? It's French. This is the most important thing to remember when watching this movie. Otherwise, you'll just think it makes no sense at all. Having been promised lots of money over the phone, Zoe Saldana is then kidnapped. Yes, there is someone there. We know there's someone there because the director gives us a shot from your POV, love, and we can clearly see someone is sitting right there. The man sitting there is the evil cartel boss known as Manitas. He is evil because he has man in his name, and for this movie, that is quite sufficient. But Manitas wants to leave manhood and so evil behind. He wants to transition. He sings a bit of his grand plan, and by sings I mean he just speaks it in a kind of monotone staccato that seems designed to lose your attention.
Contestar esa pregunta supondría que usted ya aceptó la misión y el secreto que conlleva si le digo de qué se trata ya no hay.
Think about it, bro. How hard can writing a musical be?
Manitas has a number of tasks for which he really does not need a lawyer, but he kidnapped a lawyer anyway for opaque reasons, and so the jobs fall to Zoe Saldana. He wants her to spirit his family, his wife and 2 children, off to Switzerland, and he wants her to find him a good gender specialist surgeon, because the leader of the biggest, toughest crime cartel in Mexico doesn't have anyone who can buy plane tickets or Google gender reassignment clinics. This is the point at which the movie begins to lose what little coherence it has, because hitherto it's been something of an adaptation. The story Écoute by Boris Razon has a chapter featuring a Mexican cartel boss who wishes to change gender to escape a life of crime, which inspired Audrillard to pen whatever the fuck this movie is.
That's a short story, c'est un roman.
It's a novel, okay.
C'est un roman écrit par un ami, Boris Razon, et c'était très... C'est un garçon qui a vécu pas mal en Amérique du Sud, et ça se passait au Mexique. Et dans son roman, il y avait dans un chapitre, au milieu, il y avait ce personnage qui s'appelait pas Manitas dans le roman, qui s'appelait El Flaco, et qui voulait faire une transition. Et alors je tourne les pages du roman, je trouve ça saisissant. C'est un tel paradoxe entre l'extrême virilité, le désir de féminité, le patriarcat, la violence. C'était très singulier. Je tourne les pages, je passe les chapitres, et puis il n'y a rien du tout. Il ne développe pas le personnage. Ce qui fait que moi j'appelle mon ami 2 jours après, je lui dis est-ce que tu as un projet pour ce personnage-là? Il ne comprend même pas de quoi je lui parle. Il me dit non, j'ai pas de projet du tout. Pourquoi? Je dis parce que je vais te l'apprendre, cette idée. Voilà, c'est ce que j'ai fait. Et ça a commencé comme ça. Et après, derrière, j'ai tout écrit.
But said character plays quite a small role in Razon's book, which I'm not going to pretend I've read. And crucially, the transition is an extension of the illegality. He wishes merely to get away undetected. He is not sincerely dysphoric. It is just a ploy. It was after chatting with Gascon that the decision was made to add genuine desire and seemingly moral ends to this template character, meaning that Emilia Perez ceases to be an adaptation at the precise moment we learn about the titular character's motive. It becomes an original work. The problem is, though, that they kind of forgot to do most of that work. An original character making such a drastic change, not just to genitalia but to moral outlook, Perez will make several bizarre attempts to atone for her past life, kind of, requires quite the drastic instigating cause, a moral motive, to explain the profound change. Why? For what reason? What prompted the transition from villainous to redemptive arc?
¿Quiere cambiar de vida o quiere cambiar de sexo?
¿Cuál es la diferencia?
And that's it. That is the extent of the reasoning we're gonna get. Your life, your sex, they're the same thing. Changing one means changing the other. Were you a mass-murdering, drug-dealing crime cartel boss and a man? Well, don't worry, plastic surgery, that can also fix your soul.
Pero señor Del Monte, eso puede durar años. Eso no se hace así de la nada.
Si el tratamiento hace 2 años.
You guys, Mr. Garrison has titties.
Boo, I wanted to see the boobs. The implied boobs are kind of a plot hole, actually, because not only does Manitas here want to leave manhood behind, he also wants to leave his wife and his 2 small children behind as well. One of Zoe Saldana's many tasks will be setting them up in Switzerland for no particular reason, but the plan entails them being completely unaware of what's going on. They don't know Manitas is transitioning into Emilia Perez, and he's going to fake his own death. And yet, apparently, he started transitioning years ago. Did he not have sex with his wife for years, despite having 2 very young children? And despite her being Selena Gomez? Did she not notice that her husband now has bigger tits than she does? How does any of this work? This plan entails him lying to everybody he knows, his criminal friends, his wife, his children, his society, to escape his life of crime. Criminal men pretending to be women in a bid to get away with everything is another. What did the movie mean by this moment? And one of quite a few reasons the latter part of the Rainbow Reich doesn't like the film very much. I actually think this, and all the consequences that derive from it, is one of the most interesting bits about the movie. It's morally degenerate in that the movie doesn't recognize shitty behavior as shitty behavior, but it adds pretty significant depth to its protagonist later on. Unfortunately, to be an activist is to disavow complexity. Anything less than full-throated affirmation is, and I quote, quote, a profoundly retrograde portrayal of a trans woman. So Manitas gives Zoe Saldana his credit card with all of his money on it. He lets her in on all of his plans and his schemes, and rather than take all this money and this information and use it to bust the country's biggest crime cartel, thus earning the money and status she thinks she's entitled to by doing a good deed, nah, fuck it, Zoe Saldana goes along with the wacky gender transition adventure. And no, the movie will never once address the dubious morality of her actions. Off she flies to Bangkok. Bangkok is the location of our next musical set piece, which for reasons of art is entirely performed by the musically disabled.
Mammoplasty.
Yes.
Vaginoplasty.
Yes.
Rhinoplasty.
Yes.
Oh, by the by, when he asks her which way the transition is meant to go, she confirms that it's from man to woman. But then he asks her if it's for her.
Man to woman or woman to man.
Man to woman.
Is it for you?
What does the movie mean by this?
Et ce qui est drôle, c'est qu'à l'origine, le personnage de Rita, de l'avocate, c'était un avocat, c'était pas une avocate.
Was that an accidental sort of decision?
A large part of the, song is just the tone-deaf doctor listing the various procedures. This all could have been a Google search, but fuck it, why not? Later, Saldana buys herself some nice clothes, stops back at her hotel, gets bagged again.
En primera clase. Apúrate, chingada madre. Se me acaba el tiempo.
¿Y cuánto tiempo en total?
Son 26 horas.
No, tengo que regresar antes del jueves, tengo audiencia.
No llegará a tiempo.
Entonces encuéntrame otra cosa.
Off we jet to Tel Aviv, where Gascon's comments about the Muslims might get a better reception. The friendly doctor sings, this is definitely singing, some foreshadowing at us.
But I will never fix the soul. If he's a he, she'll be a he. If he's a she, she'll be a she. If he's a wolf, she'll be a wolf. If he's the wolf, you'll be his sheep.
This moral lesson about gendered souls and whatnot isn't really prompted by anything except the need for foreshadowing. But, I guess it sets out the movie's trans ontology. Operations cannot change the soul, he says. This is fine if your soul is actually female, but it won't be great if your soul is actually a wolf, and it'll be even worse if your soul is actually male, because then you'll be prone to relapses into violence and villainy and evil skullduggery and other wolfish male pursuits. Best hope Manitas has a female soul, right? Because, as everybody knows, women are simple beings of light and magic and beauty. Honestly, I think women have more cause to be miffed by Emilia Perez than the trans people do. Men as well, but no self-respecting man is watching this movie. Oh fuck, what does that make me? Anyway, then the movie destroys 2,000 years of the body-soul distinction.
Changing the body changes society. Changing society changes the soul. Changing the soul changes society. Changing society changes it all.
Look, Ike, your daddy's a dolphin.
If you had seen what he has shown to me, you'd be a better man.
What? What has he shown to you? You had a bag over your head. The only thing you've seen is a mass-murdering drug lord. How does that make anyone a better person? Anyway, then they kidnap the doctor and drag him out of Israel, which is pretty much the opposite of how this usually goes, and which makes pretty much all the preceding redundant. Why kidnap a lawyer to Google a doctor and then kidnap the doctor when you could have saved that time and kidnapped the doctor in the first place? Manitas explains the profound existential doubt he has been suffering. No, it has nothing whatsoever to do with all the people he's killed or the lives he's destroyed, though they will be relevant later. He's just sick and tired of living a lie, and he deserves to be happy, alright? We all deserve to be happy, no matter how many mass graves we've dug.
Pero ya no puedo más. Pensé cientos de veces en quitarme la vida. Pero no es justo desaparecer sin haber vivido tu propia vida.
But what about your wife and your children, Manitas? What about their best life?
Sé que tengo que dejar muchas cosas atrás, pero no puedo hacer otra cosa.
Oh, well, I mean, if you've got no choice, then I guess that's just fine. No, obviously it's not. It's a dick move, but it's by far the most interesting through line in the movie, even if the movie doesn't really have a clue what it's trying to say or to do with it. Manitas cannot, in fact, leave everything behind, as he later decides that he wants his kids back after all. A competent movie would have focused on this and incurred further they-them activist rage by giving us a proper character study rooted in a conflict of needs and identities. By giving us a deep, complex, well-rounded trans character, one who thinks they can escape the past but realizes they will never escape their old attachments, Emilia Perez could have more accurately portrayed the lives and struggles of actual trans people, rather than the weird utopian fetishists who too often speak for them. Unfortunately though, the movie feels a pressing need to insult Mexico some more, so we don't really have time for any such thoughtful exploration. The essential beats for it are all there, they are present, but nothing is said or concluded about them, and you come away with the tragic sense that the movie is only ever interesting by accident. Being a lawyer, Zoe Saldana is able to source fake passports for Selena Gomez and the kids, find them a lakefront house in Switzerland, I've been there, it ain't cheap, and secretly deposit huge amounts of cash in their accounts, so they'll be well taken care of for all of the 5 off-screen minutes they spend there.
Voy a acompañarlos y ayudarlos a establecerse. Me imagino que no va a ser fácil al principio, pero con el tiempo lo olvidarán.
This is important because it's pretty much the only time in the entire movie that Zoe Saldana has even an implied relationship with the children. They're going to Switzerland rather than to stay with Selena Gomez's sister in the US for safety. Keep all this in mind because the movie won't. Via another song dedicated to the desecration of meaning itself. The fam gets sent to Switzerland, which they are not happy about. And then they see on the news that Manitas is dead, and Selena Gomez in particular is distraught by the news. Once again, keep this in mind because the movie won't. Manitas has his operation in secret. We get pretty much the only competent visual in the entire film as the doctor's notebook burns up in a fire, symbolizing the death of a past life. And voila, Emilia Perez is born. The movie almost seems to juxtapose his, now her, Frankensteinian happiness with Selena Gomez's grief. It almost seems to want you to think that this is all some selfish fantasy with tremendous human cost, perhaps even a bad thing. But at some point, they realized that this is what they'd done, and they thought, oh fuck, we can't be having that, we need to win awards. So shortly after her imminent reintroduction, Selena Gomez's character will reveal that she never loved Manitas really, and she'd been cheating on him for years with a chap called Gustavo. It is very, very important to the movie that we never attach moral consequences to Manitas' transition, because otherwise people might complain, which they did anyway, because of course they did. Before we get to that revelation, however, Zoe Saldana is now in London and mixing with polite society, and who should show up at the dinner party but a mysterious woman who is quite obviously and unmysteriously post-op Manitas, Emilia Perez herself.
Are you English?
No, I'm not English. Why?
No, because you have something special, something different. You are pretty. Sorry.
I'm Mexican.
We get another song that accomplishes precisely fuck all, consisting as it does of Zoe Saldana wondering why Emilia Perez has come for her, and Perez telling her all of the reasons she hasn't come for her, only answering the question after the musical number has concluded. I am by no means an expert in musicals because I'm not that gay, but I always assumed the point of the songs in a musical was to amplify rather than delay the narrative. If you're completely splitting your narrative narrative beats and your musical beats, is it really a musical at all? Or is it just a film with some songs? Anyway, she gives Zoe Saldana another job. Bring my ex-wife and ex-kids back to Mexico because I've decided I want them back for reasons. This means that even though they have loads of money and complete independence from the man who put them there, who they believe to be dead, and even though they never wanted to be in Switzerland in the first place, and they would rather have gone to live in the States with Selena Gomez's sister instead, they stayed in Switzerland because that's where the plot needed them to be. So that's where they are. Agency, it's not for them, alright? And even though the front story is that Emilia Perez is Manitas's obscure cousin, and so not a legal guardian or in any way responsible for or holding power over them, the fam just jets back to Mexico. Even though the whole reason they were dumped in Switzerland rather than anywhere closer is that it wasn't safe for them in Mexico. I guess we've just got over that trifling concern. But back they go, and from the poor kids' perspective, they are now being molested by a weird old aunt that they've never met, and Selena Gomez is trapped in a stranger's mansion for some reason with a woman who has just decided that they are going to be like sisters. You literally sent your family away, faked your own death, and became a woman. No, fucking don't dwell on how others have changed. And yes, do leave those kids alone. What does the movie mean by this? The kids' main complaint is that they don't like Mexico, which is fair enough, and they would rather be skiing in Switzerland instead, while Selena Gomez feels trapped in a stranger's house, which is also fair enough. Although she expresses this frustration in the form of a song in which she has some sort of extended fit and periodically dips out into another dimension. I will add this to the very long list of reasons I hate musicals. Her profound boredom is what leads her to call Gustavo.
Si este es tu número, Gustavo, I'll just cut to the chase. Hasta me duele la pinche vulva nada más de acordarme de ti.
Hey, hope I got the right number. My vagina's like the Niagara Falls and I want your canoe inside me. Okay, lots of love, bye. That I think I would call a risky move. Sadly, we must now spend a considerable amount of time away from pained pussy because the movie now decides it wants to insult Mexico some more. Selena Gomez and Emilia Perez are out at a restaurant having a meal. Perez's pitch is, hey, how about you stick around and you do nothing and I pay you for it? But then a total stranger comes past handing out photos of her missing son. He's one of Mexico's desaparecidos, one of the more than 100,000 people disappeared during the country's war on crime generally and the drug cartels in particular. Add to that total more than 500,000 who've died in organized crime-related homicides during the war against the cartels, and you begin to get some sense of the scale of this social calamity. It is a serious subject and it deserves a serious treatment. But oh no, here comes a French, and he thinks it's worthy of a little comic opera in which the protagonist, who is responsible for many of these deaths and disappearances, decides, fuck it, this is all really easy to solve and it'll make me feel nice. How about we just tell Mexico to get its shit together? Nobody's ever thought of doing that before, I'm sure it's just that easy. Emilia Perez, who only thinks to do this during the restaurant scene, having done nothing about it before now, has a plan. The plan is very simple. The plan is not to reveal her true identity, expose the corrupt politicians she used to work with, divulge the location of mass graves she herself created, thereby sacrificing herself to make amends to her country, because that would be the good and the moral thing to do, and we can't be having that. So no, her plan instead is to start an NGO to raise money from corrupt politicians, then to use that money to vaguely raise awareness, all the while sending Zoe Saldana into prisons to speak to various criminals who used to work for Manitas so that they can divulge the location of the mass graves. Mexico is fixed. Emilia escapes justice. We can solve decades worth of cultural trauma with song. Naturally, this has displeased many Mexicans because it rather implies they've all been too useless to consider doing any of these incredibly basic things like raising awareness and asking criminals where they left the bodies. There's even a song and a dance number later which in essence sees a bunch of people standing up singing "You gotta do better, Mexico," all of which has been inspired by the holy saint of beatific transness that is Emilia Perez. And yes, they do literally turn her into a saint at the end of the movie, but we'll get there. Dare I say it, this all seems in pretty poor taste. It annoys me for entirely separate reasons. A much simpler way to tell this story, with a much better moral message at the end of it, would be to have Emilia bring Zoe Saldana back to Mexico because she's already conceived of this plan, because she really has changed, because guilt about her past actions has caught up with her, and she really does want to make amends. The story would then be about reckoning with her past, in which the kids and the deceased play parallel roles, and the conclusion would be that you cannot simply run away to a new life free of all your obligations. The past will catch up with you, and the only moral thing to do is to stand up, to say sorry, and to face the consequences. The family bit is the film's deliberate and conscious complication in this plan, but it doesn't seem to have recognized any of the other glaring problems. An impossibly rich woman with no known background suddenly turns up at the public face of a registered NGO soliciting money from politicians, who seems to have a private army working for her, who seems to have brought the wife and kids of a former gang leader back from Switzerland to live with her, who seems to know exactly which prisons to go to and exactly which prisoners to speak to uncover all of the mass graves? Seems like someone might start asking a few questions about that. Seems like it's only a matter of time before someone starts piecing things together. Seems like an intolerable amount of risk for someone who, and I cannot stress this enough, is only doing this because it makes her feel good about herself. Listen, this is her reaction to finding the deceased body of the woman and then seeing her cry in front of her.
Cuando me besó las manos y sentí sus lágrimas. Por primera vez me amé a mí misma.
You've gone fucking psycho, son. Fucking psycho.
No, fucking stop thinking about it. Stop asking questions. It's French. We know that means it doesn't have to make sense. Later that night, we get the film's only unambiguously strong scene. As Emilia goes in to say goodnight to the kids, and one of them notices that she smells like her dead dad. Somewhere there is a psychiatrist with massive dollar signs in his eyes. This prompts the kid to sing through a list of memories brought about by this familiar smell, which is a genuinely good scene, and the closest we ever get to a thematic reckoning with the past, a repudiation of the earlier fanciful notion that changing the body is changing the soul, is changing society, or whatever the fuck. Having picked this ball up without necessarily realizing what it's done, the movie will completely fumble it later, but this scene could have been the very strong foundation of a much better movie that wasn't written by a Frenchman. Here, after all, is Emilia Perez, somebody who changed sex in order to escape the past, who is discovering that she cannot do that because, in the first place, she has old attachments, and in the second place, people are still attached to who she used to be. Yep, there's a lot of really fascinating, interesting, heartfelt stuff we could do with that. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that's the kind of film that the trans community generally really needs, because it's a great way of humanizing what is otherwise seen to be a radical activist political movement. Showing the very real struggles of individuals is a great way of engendering public sympathy for you. Would have made for a much more compelling story than Let's Fix Mexico with Dance. But that is the film that we've kind of got, so moving on. The next day, Emilia Perez, who faked her own death to escape a life of crime, decides that she absolutely still has contacts in the criminal underworld who absolutely will not ask any questions. One goes into a prison, asks an inmate, "Hey, recognize this kid?" And he says, "Nope, but we did murder a ton of hostages and bury them in this location, so maybe you should check there." And they check there, and they find the body, and so his mother can finally mourn him properly, and Emilia can feel just so very swell about herself. It really cannot be stressed enough just how fucking weird this entire sequence is. The Frenchman treats Mexico's cultural trauma with all the care and grace Diddy presumably showed his young female victims.
Dime cuántos desaparecidos hay en el país.
Decenas de miles.
No puedo
podemos quedarnos de brazos cruzados.
You disappeared them! You did that, you fucking psycho! The film simultaneously wants to show that there are aspects of your past, your affections primarily, that you cannot escape. But when it comes to the mass murders you've committed, nah, you can just sex change those right away. And this is the pose struck by both characters, by Emilia, who was responsible for many of these deaths, and by Zoe Saldana, who began the movie feeling disgusted at herself for helping get guilty men off without charge. Here they are, both acting as though these murders were really committed by somebody else. And they really are just the white knights riding to the rescue. Characters being in denial isn't necessarily a bad thing by any means, but that's not what's happening here. The film is in denial. What we're witnessing is a mass murderer taking credit for solving her own murders that she's decided to pin on a whole country, rather than an individual taking responsibility for the crimes they themselves committed.
Conozco un buen de arrepentidos que estarían dispuestos a hacer el bien.
Emilia, eso sería muy peligroso para ti.
Oh, sure, it's too dangerous for her. Also, go fuck yourself, film. Do you really mean to suggest that there are tons of people in Mexican prisons who would willingly confess to all of this, but nobody until now, until Saint Emilia, has ever thought to ask them? This whole nation has been waiting for Saint Emilia to come along and make Mexico moral. What does the movie mean by this? Of course, Emilia won't go into the prison herself. Oh no, she will send Zoe Saldana in her place. And yep, everyone will just confess their crimes to her, even though they have no fucking clue who she is or who she works for. Nobody fears reprisals from the other gangs, from the law, from their fellow inmates. Nobody will target the lawyer who's leading the charge. Nothing will happen to prevent this incredibly simple solution, because if the movie was actually interested in the tragedy it's exploiting for award show cred, it wouldn't be this simple. Oh, and it's not just mass murder these prisoners confess to, by the way. Oh no, it is also mass dismemberment, the chopping up of whole families, the burning of random pensioners. And while we get this macabre montage, Emilia Perez is outside being feted for all her good works as the people following her orders confess to her crimes.
¿Con qué dinero va a financiar la asociación? Con el mío, pero todas las personas generosas que quieran aportar son bienvenidas. Muchas gracias. Les daremos toda la información cuando entreguemos los estatutos de la asociación.
Where'd you get your money from, Emilia? Fucking US aid? Does Mexico not have journalists? What the fuck is the charter going to say? I made my millions from my dead cousin who disappeared, coincidentally, when I showed up on the scene. And by the way, he also ran one of these cartels and he killed loads and loads of people, and that's where the money came from. I've used this word before. This is anti-writing. It's not just nonsense, it makes anti-sense. It is so obviously and so proudly broken that it is daring you to give a shit. But that's what we're here for. This is where we get the You Gotta Do Better Mexican song with the refrain, I am here. Because, you know, Emilia has shown them the way, so now, for the first time, all these poor, benighted Mexicans, they've all bothered to show up. Some of the perp motives are, interesting.
Para criar hoy a mis hijos con dinero limpio, para aprender a calcular que 1 y 2 son 3, para limpiar mi piel de tatuajes.
If you know that 1 + 2 makes 3, you can already calculate that 1 + 2 makes 3, you fucking dunce. You've plainly got some other malfunction. Oh, you know what? I'm just kinda bored of my tattoos. Maybe I'll tell everyone where I raped and murdered that baby so I can get them erased. Yeah, that is my impression of a Mexican. Movie, what the fuck is going on? Anyway, you'd think, given the severity of the subject matter, that this musical number would be up for the best song gong, right? But no, you see, because the mistake you'd be making there is assuming that Oscars types actually give a fuck about real social problems, and they don't. Emilia Perez has 2 songs in contention. We arrive at one of them presently. Before we get there, however, we do get one of the film's precious few interesting scenes, which is Selena Gomez coming home after a night out with Gustavo and landing herself in a chat with Emilia about her old love life. Did you love Manitas? Did you consider leaving him? Did you cheat on him? What would he have done if you had? And not knowing who she's speaking to, Selena Gomez can bring more candor to the scene, which in turn means that the fearsome Manitas gets the unvarnished truth for perhaps the first time ever. This is a pretty clever clever bit of setup, and as with the kids' song earlier, as with the conflagration later, it has all the ingredients for a good movie. It just can't be one of those because it's also trying to be two other worse movies at the same time. Then we do indeed get to the first of the best song nomination scenes. Emilia and Zoe Saldana have put on a big fundraising gala to which have been invited all Mexico's great and ungood, the very politicians and petty officials who Manitas had in his pocket. They're also the very people Zoe Saldana hated exonerating at the beginning of the movie. So this is kind of her chance to air her frustrations, albeit in a non-diegetic musical number, meaning that she's only airing them to the audience, not to anybody in universe, and so she will never have to account for the crimes in which she was complicit. This, rather than the scores of dead and mutilated children, is what really gets the tiny penises at the Academy standing to attention. Zoe Saldana singing about how evil rich people are? A song about vile, corrupt elites? It reminds us of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, probably. Oh, isn't it so bold and daring? Unaddressed and unaccounted for is the minor inconsistency, which is that these people are all very rich, Zoe Saldana kept them all out of jail, and yet Zoe Saldana did not have money. And then the major inconsistency, Zoe Saldana chose to become rich by working for the same mass-murdering psycho they all used to take bribes from, whose identity she has pledged to keep secret for some reason.
Narcos, corruptos, maleantes. ¿Te molesta?
Que la lucecita busque dinero sucio. Sí, me molesta.
Who pays your salary, Zoe? Who pays your salary, Zoe? An indeterminate amount of time later, Emilia meets another relative of the disappeared with whom she has a fling.
Alice and I talked and we really opened up to each other, and then we scissored all night long.
You have to be careful with scissors.
That Israeli doctor sure did a good job, otherwise the ruse might have been discovered. It's a strange little episode that struggles to find any sort of place in the broader narrative and which gets no payoff at all. I think it's here to provide a kind of oblique mindset shift, having begun by declaring that she doesn't desire, or whatever that original song had us believe she wanted or didn't want. Now she realizes that she kind of still does desire. She still desires love, and the preceding events have awakened her to the fact that she has not left the past behind. She might be half new, but she's half old as well. As we get from this next song, which exists in conversation with the earlier one. The problem is that it presents as impetus. Suddenly spawned lesbian makes her realize that she still wants something of her old self, kind of, maybe, in that she wants love and desire, and yet her arc is already some way ahead of that. Why did it take Suddenly Lesbian to achieve what the kids are already an expression of, and what Selena Gomez could have been an expression of, and what guilt over past murders should be an expression of? Lesbianism doesn't achieve anything that couldn't or shouldn't have been achieved purely with existing elements. Most of what it accomplishes is already in motion, so it's not really instigating the things it's there to instigate. At some later point, the movie does realize that it's introduced essentially a redundant narrative element, and it just kind of discards it before the end, so it's not even worth getting to know who this person is or what her name is, because it's not going to be relevant pretty much ever again. Zoe Saldana is still relevant though, sometimes, and she's now unhappy with her lot. Her unhappiness has nothing to do with her working for an Uber criminal, nor is it mitigated by her giving thousands of families the closure they so desperately need. No, she's unhappy because she's now 40 years old and she doesn't have a boyfriend, so she goes clubbing. And who else should be at the club but Selena Gomez and Gustavo, who perform our next Oscar-nominated song, which has some rather questionable lyrics. Hey, the fuck is Gustavo singing along for? Does he want to be a woman too? I mean, there are a lot of chemicals in the water these days, it's perfectly possible. B. This Hollywood meta, that being a woman is just loving yourself as you are, is incredibly shallow. I compared this movie to Barbie when we broke it down on Cap's stream, link in the description by the way, for this reason among others. It presents itself as a thoughtful movie and it does make some attempts at thinking, and it almost always fails at this endeavor because it has so little worth thinking about. Barbie had the self-same concept of woman as Narcissus, and the same complete lack of self-awareness in presenting unhappy women being assholes to men while drawing no link at all about these two things. In Barbie, the feminist Taliban tricked the Kens back to gendered apartheid by pretending to listen to them talk about all the interesting things they were interested in and then pulling the rug from under them. While in this movie, Zoe Saldana zones out while a man is talking to her in order to listen to Selena Gomez sing a generic pop song about self-love, which naturally got an Oscar nomination. C. Relatedly, Selena Gomez's character is a mother in this movie. The fuck are you talking about? If you jump off your cliff, it's your path. Traditionally, going off path is what leads people to fall off cliffs. Are you really trying to suggest that loving yourself every day is the only thing that matters while your two young children are at home playing games? And you wonder why you're so unhappy. Well, never mind what the movie means by this, because we're about to move into Emilia Perez's third movie and also act, which is basically just a knockoff version of Sicario for some reason. No answers to any of the preceding will be found there. Selena Gomez gets home after an implied walk of shame, and Emilia Perez is unhappy that she's being a bit of a shit mother. Yes, Emilia Perez is criticizing somebody else's parenting, but this does at least demonstrate growth from a comically unfit premise. This leads to our penultimate strong-ish scene as Selena Gomez announces she's getting married, that she's been waiting 5 long years for this to happen, which in turn gives something of a lie to her earlier reassurance that she did kind of love Manitas, and that she's taking the kids away to live with Gustavo. This prompts a payoff to the doctor's earlier warning about men and wolves being evil.
Tú te puedes ir a chingar a tu puta madre si quieres con el pinche vato ese, pero mis hijos se quedan aquí.
It's only strong-ish because, well, the performance itself is quite good. You are quite clearly, visibly and audibly seeing her revert to her mannish, wolfish guise. But I say strong-ish because the movie can't give us a convincing reason why Selena Gomez has waited 5 years to do this. If she has agency now, she had this agency from pretty much the moment Manitas supposedly died, but she didn't act on it because the movie wasn't ready for it to happen yet. The pretty good wolves payoff is only paying off an unprompted setup beat supported only by the meta need for foreshadowing, and Emilia's relapse into Manitas then gets completely suspended to justify the next story beat, which is Selena Gomez taking the kids and escaping in the dead of night, despite Emilia having good reason and personal motive to lock her up, and plenty of guards and servants all over the house, and so on, and so on. The Manitas Ascendant interlude is fatally flawed by this kind of thing too. We're supposed to believe that this was one of the biggest, baddest, most ruthlessly lethal crime lords on the planet, yet not only does he not lock up his recalcitrant ex-wife, but he sends goons to merely threaten Gustavo, which is like telling the school bully you'll piss yourself if he tickles you. Obviously this is going to backfire, and it's going to backfire quite badly, and the real Manitas would surely never have made this mistake, and yet the movie A tells us this is Manitas asserting himself to make these decisions, and B does nothing to show or explain why Manitas, not Emilia, might now choose to use a lighter touch in these negotiations. A sensible movie that didn't want to end with a random gunfight followed by a car chase followed by explosions might have had Manitas kill Gustavo, and by that act lose Selena Gomez and the kids, thereafter spiral out of control until being forced to reconcile the old wants and needs dilemma with which the movie began. The ultimate affirmation of the trans experiment, the becoming of Emilia Perez, would be in her learning what truth, duty, and responsibility really entail. She did all this out of some shallow conception of self-satisfaction, believing she could get everything she wants, but she learns at the close that truth, duty, and responsibility entails sacrifice, and no small sacrifice at that. But again, the movie is French, so fuck sense. Having threatened Gustavo, Emilia wakes up the next day to discover that Selena Gomez is gone and she has indeed taken the kids. We get a brief conference call scene where poor Zoe Saldana wonders why the fuck she's still in the movie getting yelled at by mad women, in which the movie briefly juxtaposes the demand for money with the demand for children, as though it has something to say on this point, which it kind of doesn't. And then Emilia herself gets kidnapped. Emilia froze Selena Gomez's accounts, you see, somehow. So the ransom demand made to Zoe Saldana is, give us all the money and let us run off with the kids and we'll give you Emilia back. Look, here are some fingers to show we're serious, because we've seen this happen in better movies, so you know we're serious. The movie forgets that Emilia is the head of a massive NGO with extensive contacts among Mexico's political, legal, and criminal networks, because if it remembered any of these things, then this plan would have been much easier to foil. It also forgets that she's captured the soul of a whole nation, because, again, if it remembered that, then it might have had to do something with it, and it doesn't want to. So instead, Zoe Saldana has only a small team of incompetent guns for hire, and they go off not to make the trade, because the plan is for the incompetent guns for hire to circle around the back and take Gustavo by surprise, and they fail because they are incompetent. Shooting indiscriminately at the house where your hostage is being held has a pretty high chance of killing that hostage, but this doesn't happen either because they are incompetent. Now, as should be obvious, unless you are a French director, a big climactic gun battle is not the best place to have a heartfelt character moment that is also a surprise character reveal, that is also an admission of past crimes, because these things naturally work against each other. The backstory elements suck the pace, the tension, and the freneticism out of the action sequence, and the action sequence leaves too little time and space for the character beats to play out with their proper weight. Within about 5 minutes, we're going from, oh, by the way, I know I look like a woman, but I'm really your ex-husband, and I loved you all along, and I'm sorry for everything, to bang. Well, the fuck that, says Audrillard, we're doing it anyway. So while the guns go off, Emilia has a chat with Selena Gomez and starts revealing who she really is by relaying intimate memories. Selena Gomez is incredibly slow on the uptake, which would be fine, except that we don't really have time for her to be this slow. This is the kind of scene that could and probably should have taken place after the gunfight had mortally wounded Emilia, who in some ideal alternate universe where this movie is better, as opposed to the ideal universe where it doesn't exist, would have got shot defending Selena Gomez, thus paying off multiple threads of character development around care and responsibility, with the tragic end poignantly repudiating Selena Gomez's earlier narcissism. Emilia's death in this alt version of the film would be the example that she couldn't set in life. And this is the last musical number in that hypothetically better movie, and the last beat of that hypothetically better movie would have been a genuinely sad and heartfelt moment, but it would at least redeem the two of them. Emilia would die for her old obligations, the ones she began by selfishly casting aside, and Selena Gomez would go back to her kids with a new appreciation for what love for others really means. It would make her a fit mother to her children. Her turning her back on Gustavo as he's led away in cuffs would symbolize the death of bad old things and the advent of a new and better way of living. The fact it's so easy to write better versions of this movie is paradoxically proof that the movie isn't without merit. This alternate ending is only paying off stuff that is actually in the film we got, character beats we've actually seen, themes that are actually present. And yet, it is French. So the rescue attempt fails. The conversation takes place, and Gustavo thinks, fuck it, we'll just stick Emilia in the trunk, drive off, and we'll have another go later. But while they're driving away, Selena Gomez has a crisis, and she tries to stop the car. This leads to a fight, the car falls off a cliff. Zoe Saldana teleports so she gets to witness the final conflagration, and the car explodes for some reason, killing everybody inside. Oh dear, somebody's going to have to tell the kids. But hey, at least Zoe Saldana gets some kids now, and she didn't even need no man.
I've been, scrubbing through the movie, talking about it, and looking at some of these scenes. Like, I don't think she's had a whole scene with the kids in the entire movie. She's been in the same room as them. She's been in the same room as them.
She never interacts with them, I don't think.
No.
Yeah.
No. Those are just her kids now. How funny is that? That's just, and I guess that's the conclusion of her arc. I put in giant scare quotes. She got kids finally. Not
She's 40, and so that's one way to have kids after 40, I suppose.
I guess so. It's a little convoluted, but hey, if it works for you, I guess.
And because there's the final scene where she tells the kids come home from school, I think, and she's in their house. And she tells them, yeah, your mum's not coming back. And she never, ever, I don't think, mentions anything about the father. I suppose because that would just take too long to explain. How would you even go about accounting for all of this crazy nonsense in the final scene of your movie?
She pounds a shot of tequila and goes, all right, dude, this is going to be a long story. Okay, we can settle in.
They have the rest of their lives together, so presumably she'll tell them at some point, right? The movie presents it like that's not something she feels she has to tell them. There's not even the
shame, because you could have leaned into, again, the South Park-like quality. She sits and says it right. By the way, your mum's dead. By the way, your aunt's your dad. By the way, your dad's dead too. And
then they just like look with blank expressions on their face, and then they go, so are we moving back to Switzerland or what?
No, I'm pretty sure this isn't how it works legally. You don't get to say, you're mine now, whenever you come upon an orphan. And we were explicitly told earlier in the film that they have an actual aunt in the US, but I guess we just forgot about her. Somehow this is not the end of the movie though, because now we have to try and wrap it all up in one neat little bow. And how better to do that than by turning Emilia Perez into the Virgin Mary and parading her through the streets in some sort of funeral procession so everyone can love and appreciate the wonderful things she did to them. I mean, for them. For them is definitely what I meant. Nobody here knows what she did to them. The statue is missing its fingers. I'm not sure how they explained that one to the crowd, or indeed to the person who designed it, given what we just saw had no bearing at all on the whole saving Mexico from itself arc that was the middle third of the movie. They could have done a Two-Face from the Dark Knight style eulogy, Zoe Saldana selling a deliberate lie because it's better that the people remember a useful martyr than that they know how evil she truly was. A speech where Emilia's death is blamed on the cartels taking vengeance for the good work she did against them, an injunction to live by the example she set. All of this being the utilitarian way Saldana justifies her own part in the story, which, remember, is morally questionable. Something like that is necessary because otherwise the various bits of the film don't really line up at all, and the story doesn't even begin to address the important question of accountability. It's the difference between a morally complex but satisfying conclusion and a conclusion that doesn't account for the morally complex story it's been telling. Emilia died, and we're supposed to think this is tragic, and she is hailed as a martyr, but she killed thousands and thousands of people, and she profited from that twice. First as the head of a cartel, secondly as the head of an NGO which exploited the cartels that she used to run. This cannot be allowed to pass without comment. We need to contextualize the martyrdom myth if we're to understand what the movie thinks it's doing here. Otherwise, you're left with the sense that the movie doesn't have a clue what it's doing here beyond vaguely loving its protagonist for unsupported and unsupportable reasons. But we don't do any of that. There's nothing more to be said because that's it. That is the end. That is Emilia Perez. That is the movie that has been nominated for more awards than Return of the King, and would quite possibly have won more awards were it not for Twitter archaeologists. Emilia Perez is not the worst movie ever made. Its narrative flaws come from it not really knowing what it is. There were two quite interesting ideas that it barely tried and entirely failed to gel together, and then a third Sicario derivative closing act that really shouldn't have been there at all. But a story about the trans ex-con who has to come to terms with the life she thought she'd left behind is genuinely a really interesting premise. The impetus to marry it to a broader cultural critique of Mexican society was curious. One of those things that really has to be pulled off sublimely if it's to avoid looking insultingly ridiculous. It was not pulled off sublimely. It did look insultingly ridiculous. But since it is possible to credit ideas while damning delivery, I will say that the vague inspiration, a man and a country that must come to terms with the past, well, that could have been made to work. The next to none of it did work is self-evident. It defends trans activists because it tried to complexify a trans character by elevating ideals like love and responsibility above crude narcissism and self-love. But then it sacrificed the complex character by forgetting so much of its own setup and distracting itself with staggeringly ill-judged treatments of Mexican social strife and the odd aside back into self-love again. The potentially great work it does by using children as love's locus, which prompts a redemptive arc, is then cast aside in favor of a semi-atonement scene that has no time to be anything but an identity-based moment of anagnorisis, because it takes place in the middle of a gunfight and it ends with a car chase that ends with an explosion. The kids then become a mere footnote, while the movie tastelessly tries to put its deeply flawed and really quite evil protagonist in place of the actual Virgin Mary, being hailed for, in some sense, solving problems that she in every sense caused and never took accountability for. But no, we should celebrate her and worship her for how she smells. So, have we gone back to elevating self-love above all? Is this the victory she deserved? Having murdered thousands of people, she will now be remembered in all the ways she wanted. Is that really what you want to say, movie? These are the reasons its awards nominations should be controversial. The movie is amateurish in technique, exploitative in theme, and trite in resolution. The fact it might lose those awards because of the unrelated tweets of one of its cast members, some of which have been taken wildly out of context, and others of which merely parrot opinions an awful lot of people share, well, that's a scandal in its own right. If Carla Gascon had a hammer and sickle in her bio, or if she'd repeated Hassan Piker's skull-fucked talking points, or ranted about the evils of white people, Republicans, men in general, then it's likely the movie would have garnered more awards and less attention than it's got. There are good reasons it shouldn't have been nominated for a single award, and none of those reasons will determine how many awards it actually wins. But the Oscars thought it was absolutely fine to exploit a national tragedy and award a culturally chauvinistic director, but absolutely not fine to tweet the disobliging truth about George Floyd is an indictment of the ceremony, not the movie. But it confirms, as if we needed it confirming, that the era where art and politics are indivisible is, sadly, far from over. That's it from me. See you in the next one.